Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be talking about Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
Oh, great book.
Yeah, it's a great book, really interesting. I think we're going to try to focus on, for our listeners, they're interested in kind of quickly getting up to speed on some of the concepts in the book. So
Hmm.
we're not going to be able to cover every little thing, but we're going to hit some key ideas. And in particular, what I think we want to really focus on is, the idea that when it comes to money, a lot of people think, oh, it's just about, intelligence and, being really smart with numbers, fancy spreadsheets.
Right.
And Housel's point is, well, it's not really about that. It's really more about our psychology, our behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But he really gets into how these kind of hidden forces that are driving us, these personal experiences we've had, the biases that we bring to the table, our emotions, all of that plays a bigger role than we might think.
Yeah, way more than just like raw intelligence.
Right.
And to get that point across, like right out of the gate, he tells the story of this guy, Ronald Reed,
Oh, yeah. Ronald Reed, the
the
janitor.
janitor who amassed like an $8 million fortune.
Incredible story. And I think it really does, it illustrates this idea beautifully.
Mhm.
Because you look at Ronald Reed, he wasn't a Wall Street guy. He didn't have an MBA,
Right.
but he was incredibly patient and consistent.
Like just for decades.
Decades, yeah. Just putting money into, like, blue chip stocks,
Mm-hmm.
dividend paying stocks,
Mm-hmm.
and that consistency and letting that compounding work its magic over time.
And it's like we think of compounding, we think of, oh, like a savings account, but really that's like a tiny little bit of compounding.
Yeah.
But when you think of it in terms of like the stock market over decades.
Yeah, that's where it becomes really powerful.
It's amazing. And so you really see in the story, it's like, okay, it's not about being a genius. And it's interesting because he makes this kind of distinction too. He says, look, getting wealthy is one thing.
Right.
Staying wealthy is something totally different.
Absolutely. And he says that to stay wealthy often requires like almost a different set of skills.
You've gotta switch playbooks, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a different game.
Yeah.
I mean, getting wealthy might involve some luck, You might take some risks.
You might get that big some crazy business deal that works out.
Right, right.
Or you might invest in the right thing at the right time.
Yeah. But then when you want to hold on to that wealth, you need to be frugal. He says you need a healthy dose of paranoia,
You've got to be worried all the time, like
Yeah.
it's going to disappear.
because it can. Because things change. And also, I think it's about understanding the role of luck in all of this.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes you just get lucky.
Yeah.
And you have to realize that luck might not always be there.
You can't count on it. You can't repeat it.
Right. You can't just, assume it's always going to work out that way.
Yeah.
So that, I think, plays a big part in staying wealthy.
So one of the kind of concepts or phrases that Housel uses throughout the book that I think is really interesting is when he talks about how what you're doing seems crazy.
But I kind of understand why you're doing it.
Right.
It's a great way of putting it.
And I think it's like this idea that we all come at this from such different perspectives, and our experience is like so unique.
And I think what he's getting at there is that our personal experiences, our history with money, whether we grew up with a lot of it, whether we grew up with very little, that shapes how we view money,
Yeah.
how we view risk. And so what might seem completely irrational to one person might actually make perfect sense to somebody else.
Yeah, like a classic example, right, is like somebody who's struggling financially,
Right.
buying lottery tickets.
Yeah, classic example. On the surface, you think, well, that's just throwing money away.
Right. The odds are so small.
Infinitesimally small.
But if you really think about it, if you put yourself in their shoes,
Yeah.
and you think, okay, well, I've got very limited options.
Right.
This is like my one shot at maybe breaking out of this.
Yeah. They might be thinking, what have I got to lose? This is, this tiny little investment could change my life. So it's not that it's a good idea, but you can understand the psychology behind it.
Right. So it's like, it's crazy, but, you
Yeah.
get it.
You get it. Yeah.
And he even he brings up this anecdote about an economist
Oh, right.
who was talking to people about their experiences during the Great Depression.
Yeah, and how some people were just, deeply scarred by that experience.
And it like framed their entire financial worldview, you know?
Absolutely. It made them very risk averse,
Right.
very focused on security, on saving.
And then other people, he said, like he gave the example of JFK.
Oh, right. JFK,
Yeah.
whose family was, very wealthy, so he didn't even really experience the Great Depression.
Yeah, he was like completely sheltered from it.
Right.
So it's like it just shows how our experience is so different. And so when we come to the table to talk about these things, we're coming at it from totally different perspectives.
And it's so important to realize that, right? Because otherwise, you had these arguments about money as like people are talking past each other
Yeah.
because they're not even on the same page about, what risk means or how much you should save or what's important.
Right.
So I think that's a key takeaway from the book. Understanding that there is no one right answer when it comes to money.
And we all have these experiences, sometimes even we're not aware of. Like they happen when we were so young,
Yeah,
but they're still there, lurking in the background.
absolutely. Shaping our behavior.
So how do we like account for that? How do we like avoid, letting past trauma, for example, or even just like fear drive our decisions?
Well, I think, one of the things Housel talks about that I think is really helpful is this idea of having room for error. And he gets this from the world of professional blackjack players.
Oh, yeah.
And he talks about how professional card counters, these are the people who are using skill and strategy to try to beat the house. They know they can't predict every card.
Right.
But what they do is they build in this margin of safety into their bets.
They're not getting everything on one hand.
Exactly. They're not going all in every time. They're playing the long game.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really powerful analogy for personal finance.
So it's like accepting that there's going to be uncertainty.
Yeah. Accepting that you're not always going to be right.
Yeah.
That you're going to make mistakes.
And you're going to have things happen that you just didn't see coming.
Right. And so rather than trying to predict the future perfectly,
Right.
which is impossible,
Right.
you build in this buffer, this
Yeah.
room for error, so that when those unexpected things happen, and they will, you're not completely wiped out.
So instead of trying to time the market
Right.
or pick the perfect stock.
You're thinking more about, okay, how do I build a diversified portfolio?
Right.
How do I make sure I'm not overly leveraged? How do I make sure I have enough cash on hand to weather a storm?
Yeah. And I guess this kind of ties in nicely with the story that he tells about Rajat Gupta.
Oh, yeah. That's a really, it's a cautionary tale. I mean, this is a guy who was, at the top of his game, incredibly successful businessman, ran McKinsey,
And ended up in prison
ended up in prison.
for insider trading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing about his story is I think it really illustrates this danger of never being satisfied with what you have,
They always chasing more.
always chasing more, because he had, on paper, he had everything.
He had it all.
He had wealth, he had status, he had power, but it was never enough.
Right. And so he ended up, risking it all for the chance to have even more.
Yeah. And it cost him everything.
So how do we avoid that? How do we know when we have enough?
Well, that's the $1,000,000 question, right?
Yeah.
And I think it starts with, being really honest with ourselves about what's truly important,
Yeah.
about what makes us happy.
And like you were saying before, like that's so different for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is recognizing that, that comparison game that we all play,
Oh, yeah.
that can be so destructive.
Because it never ends.
It never ends. There's always going to be somebody who has more,
Yeah.
who's doing better, who's more successful.
And social media makes it even worse, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
It's a highlight reel of everybody else's, best moments.
Yeah.
So you're constantly comparing yourself to this, this idealized version of other people's lives.
So how do we break free from that? How do we define our own version of enough?
Well, I think one thing Howells talks about is the power of narratives.
Oh, yeah. This is where he talks about the alien visiting Earth
Right.
in 2009.
Right after the financial crisis.
When things are looking really bad.
And the alien's looking around. He's like, I don't understand.
All the physical stuff is still here.
The buildings are still here. The roads are still here. The resources are still here.
Yeah.
But everyone's acting like they're so much poorer.
Yeah. What happened?
And what the alien can't see is the shift in the narrative. The story that we're telling ourselves about the economy has changed.
Right.
And that's what's driving all this fear and this uncertainty and this change in behavior.
Right. So it's like, even though nothing has really changed fundamentally,
Right.
the story we tell ourselves has a huge impact on our actions.
Absolutely. And this is true in finance. It's true in life in general. The stories we believe, the narratives we subscribe to shape our reality.
So we're back talking about the psychology of money. And, before we left off, we were talking about this idea of, finding a strategy that works for you, that allows you to sleep at night. Like I was talking about how, I used to try to pick stocks and I realized that just wasn't for me.
Yeah, it can be really stressful.
It was way too stressful. So I moved to index funds. And I think that kind of, dovetails nicely with this idea that Housel brings up about planning on the plan not going according to plan.
Right. He calls it having room for error.
Room for error, yeah. So it's like, you have a plan, you think it's a good plan.
You've done your research, you've thought about it.
Yeah, you've thought it through, but then, life happens.
Life happens, exactly.
You lose your job, the market crashes, you get sick.
Medical bills.
Yeah. Medical bill. I mean, all this stuff, it's like, and Housel actually talks about how it's the stuff that you don't plan for. It's the unexpected.
The outliers.
Yeah, that actually have the biggest impact.
He calls them tail events.
Tail events, yeah.
And it's kind of like, you think about like a bell curve.
Yeah.
Right? Most things happen kind of in the middle.
The average.
Yeah, the average, the expected. But then you have these events way out on the tail.
Yeah, the black swans or whatever they call them, right?
Right. And those are the things that can really make or break you, financially speaking.
And he gives that example of Walt Disney, right? Like all of those cartoons that, flopped.
Hundreds of them. I mean, for years, he was struggling.
Losing money left and right. And then, boom, Snow White.
One movie.
Changes everything.
Changes everything. Pays off all the debts, funds a new studio.
Like that was his tail event.
Exactly.
And so it's like, you can't plan for that.
You can't predict it.
Yeah.
But you can plan for the fact that something unexpected is going to happen.
So it's not about being right all the time.
Right. It's about being able to survive when you're wrong.
Yeah. Like it's that whole quote. He quotes George Soros, right? He's like, it's not whether you're right or wrong that's important,
but how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong.
That's the key. So you could be wrong a lot.
Yes, as long as you manage those losses, you can still come out ahead.
Right. And so having that room for error, it's like, it gives you that cushion.
Yeah, it gives you that margin of safety. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to avoid single points of failure.
Single points of failure.
Yeah, it's like, in engineering, you don't want a bridge to collapse because one cable snaps.
Right.
So you build in redundancy. And I think we can apply that same principle to our financial lives.
So that would be like diversification, right?
Diversification, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not just about spreading your money across different assets.
Mm-hmm. It's about having multiple sources of income.
Multiple skills, multiple options.
Yeah.
So that if one area of your life takes a hit, you've got other things to fall back on.
Right. So it's like, it's diversifying not just your investments, but like your whole life almost.
Exactly, your whole life.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what about this idea of the price of admission? I think that was a really interesting concept that Housel brings up.
Yeah, he's talking about the fact that, if you want higher returns, you're going to have to accept some volatility.
So it's like you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Right. You can't expect to get those, big gains without taking on some risk. And that risk often manifests itself as volatility.
So it's like the volatility is like the price you pay for the potential of those higher returns.
Exactly. It's like buying a ticket to Disneyland.
Yeah.
You pay a price to get in, but then you get to enjoy all the rides. The magic.
Yeah.
The experience. And so, trying to avoid volatility altogether, it's like trying to sneak into Disneyland. You might get away with it, but you're probably going to end up in more trouble than if you just paid the price of admission.
So you're saying that volatility isn't necessarily a bad thing?
It's part of the deal. It's the cost of doing business in the market.
So you've got to be comfortable with those ups and downs.
Yeah, and he uses the example of GE. GE for years was this model of corporate success.
Yeah, like the bluest of blue chips, right?
Right. And they were so focused on creating this illusion of stability.
Smooth earnings.
Yeah, smooth earnings, predictable growth. But what they ended up doing was masking the inevitable bumps in the road. And when those bumps finally did come, they were much bigger and more devastating because they hadn't prepared for them.
So it's like they were trying to get something for nothing.
Right. And in investing, as in life, there's no free lunch.
You've got to pay the price.
Yeah.
And sometimes that price is volatility.
Sometimes it's sleepless nights. But if you can reframe it as a fee you're paying for the potential of higher returns, it becomes a little bit easier to stomach.
Yeah, it's like it's the cost of playing the
The
game.
price of admission.
Okay, so we've talked about room for error, price of admission.
Uh,
What about these appealing fictions? What are those? How do those play into this?
Appealing fictions are basically the stories we tell ourselves, the beliefs we cling to, even when the evidence suggests otherwise.
It's like we want them to be true, so we convince ourselves that they are.
Exactly.
Like that example he gives about the lady who believed World War I was the war to end all wars.
She so desperately wanted that to be true. But history proved her wrong.
Yeah, and in finance, these appealing fictions can be really dangerous.
Because they can lead us to make bad decisions.
Hmm.
We might convince ourselves we found a foolproof investment strategy.
Or that the market will always go up.
Right. Or that we're somehow smarter than everyone else. And then you get these Ponzi schemes like Bernie Madoff.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah.
a classic example. People wanted to believe in his promise of consistent high returns. They ignored the red flags because it just sounded too good to be true.
So how do we protect ourselves from these appealing fictions?
Well, I think it starts with self-awareness, recognizing that we all have biases,
Blind spots.
blind spots, and being willing to challenge our own assumptions.
So it's about being intellectually honest with ourselves.
Yeah. And seeking out diverse perspectives.
Yeah.
Don't just listen to people who tell you what you want to hear.
Right. Get outside your echo chamber.
Exactly, because the more perspectives you can consider, the better equipped you'll be to spot those appealing fictions.
So it's not just about being smart. It's about being humble too, right?
Humility is huge. Recognizing that we don't have all the answers, that we're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's okay as long as we learn from them. And I guess that kind of ties back into this idea of room for error.
Right, exactly. Because if we're humble, we're more likely to build in those margins of safety. We're more likely to be prepared for the unexpected.
So you mentioned narratives earlier, and Housel uses this great analogy of the alien visiting Earth in 2009.
Yeah, right after the financial crisis.
And the alien's looking around, he's saying, okay, all the physical stuff is still here.
The resources are still here. The buildings are still here.
But everyone's acting like they're much poorer.
What happened?
Yeah, what happened?
And the point is, what the alien can't see is the shift in the narrative.
The story.
The story that we're telling ourselves about the economy has changed.
Yeah.
And that change in the story, even though the underlying reality hasn't really changed that much, has a huge impact on our behavior.
It really shows how powerful those narratives can be.
Absolutely. And it's something to be really aware of, especially in today's world where we're bombarded with information, misinformation.
24/7 news cycle, social media.
Right. It's easy to get swept up in the hype, the fear, the greed. So we have to be really careful about the narratives that we're buying into.
So how do we do that? How do we make sure we're not getting caught up in, some crazy story that's not really true?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Self-awareness, intellectual honesty, seeking out diverse perspectives, and also being really critical thinkers.
Questioning everything.
Questioning everything. Don't just accept things at face value. Dig a little deeper. Think about the motivations of the people who are telling you these stories.
Yeah. Whose agenda are they pushing? Right.
Exactly. So, it's not about being cynical, but it's about being informed and being aware.
So Housel also kind of takes us on this journey through the history of the American consumer.
Oh, yeah. That was a really interesting part of the book.
And what was his point in doing that? Like, why did he go there?
Well, I think he was trying to show how, the events of the past, the cultural shifts, the technological advancements, all that has shaped our relationship with money.
So it's not just about, our individual psychology. It's also about these larger forces that are at play.
Exactly. And he starts with, the end of World War II.
Which was a time of, huge uncertainty, right?
Yeah. I mean, you had millions of soldiers coming home.
And there was this fear that the economy was going to tank.
Right. Because, wartime production was winding down.
But instead you had this boom.
This incredible boom.
Yeah.
The 1950s, 1960s, rising incomes, expanding suburbs. The American dream was alive and well.
Yeah. But he also points out that that period kind of set the stage for some of the problems that we're facing today.
Right, because that's when, consumer credit really started to take off.
Yeah, the buy now, pay later
Well,
mentality.
exactly. And so people started accumulating more and more debt.
And as wages stagnated, that debt became a bigger and bigger burden.
Right. And so, House's point is that those expectations that were set during those boom years, those beliefs about what constitutes a normal lifestyle, they haven't always kept pace with changing economic realities.
So it's like we're still trying to live up to this ideal that was created in a very different time.
Well, exactly. And that gap between expectations and reality is a big source of stress and anxiety for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not just about understanding our own psychology, it's also about understanding these historical and cultural forces that have shaped our money mindset.
Absolutely. And I think that's especially important today, as we're living through this period of rapid technological change, economic uncertainty.
Yeah, it feels like everything's changing so fast.
It is. And so I think House's challenge to define the game we're playing is particularly relevant now.
What does he mean by that? Define the game we're playing.
Well, he's arguing that too often we get caught up playing someone else's game.
So it's like we're trying to win at basketball when we should be playing soccer.
Exactly. And, you might be really good at dribbling and shooting, but you're never going to score a goal if you're using the wrong rules.
So how do we define our own game? How do we make sure we're not just, mimicking the strategies of others or chasing goals that aren't really meaningful to us?
I think it starts with asking ourselves some tough questions. What truly matters to us? What do we want our lives to look like? How can money help us achieve those goals?
Yeah, yeah. It's about having a clear sense of purpose.
Right. And making sure that our financial decisions are aligned with that purpose. And that might mean rejecting those conventional definitions of success,
The big house, the fancy car.
the constant pursuit of more,
Yeah. Maybe it's about prioritizing experiences over possessions.
relationships over status.
Long-term fulfillment over short-term gratification.
Exactly. And it might even mean choosing a career path that offers more meaning and purpose, even if it doesn't come with the highest salary.
So defining our own game is really about taking control of our financial lives.
And making choices that support our overall well-being.
It's about recognizing that money is a tool
A powerful tool.
that can be used to create the life we want
But it's up to us to define what that life looks like.
and to use that tool wisely.
Exactly.
This has been a really insightful discussion about the psychology of money. And when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation, and we're going to talk about some practical steps that we can take to apply these insights to our own lives. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money. We've talked about how emotions can get in the way, biases, past experiences, all this stuff that we might not even be aware of can really affect how we think about money and how we make decisions with our money.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting to kind of unpack all of that. And I think now, as we kind of wrap things up here, it's a good time to think about, okay, well, what do we do with all this information? How do we apply these insights to our own lives?
Right, right. How do we actually make this actionable, make this useful?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, one of the biggest takeaways for me from the book is this idea of playing the long game.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And Housel just hammers this home over and over again. It's like, building wealth. It's not about getting rich quick.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, it's a marathon. And he, he's contrasting that with, how kind of the world we live in today,
All about instant gratification.
Yeah, everything's so fast-paced. We're constantly bombarded with headlines about, the market's up, the market's down, this stock is hot, this stock is not,
Yeah, and it's easy to get caught up in all of that. So thinking that, investing is this game of, picking the right stock at the right time.
Yeah, like it's gambling.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But Housel's point is that, the real key to long-term success is much simpler than that.
It's about discipline.
Discipline.
Yeah.
Consistency.
Yeah. And avoiding those big mistakes.
Right. Those catastrophic losses that can really set you back.
And it's interesting because, we talked about Ronald Red earlier.
Oh, yeah, the janitor.
The janitor who, became a multimillionaire just by consistently investing in solid companies over decades.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. And it really illustrates this power of compounding.
Compounding, yeah. So explain that a little bit more. Like, I think a lot of people, they hear compounding, they think, oh yeah, that's what happens in my savings account.
Right. But it's so much more than that. It's this idea that your returns generate more returns.
So it's like a snowball effect.
Exactly. It starts small, but over time it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
That takes time, right?
It does take time.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part for a lot of people is having that patience.
Yeah, yeah. Like, we live in a world where, we want everything right now.
Right. But when it comes to investing, patience is really the key. It's about trusting the process.
Yeah, it's about having faith that, even if you're just investing small amounts consistently.
Over time, it'll add up.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's almost like magic.
It is kind of like magic.
But it takes time for that magic to work.
Exactly.
So, okay, so playing the long game, being patient, that's a big one. What about risk? How do we think about risk when it comes to this long-term perspective?
Yeah, I mean, risk is a huge part of investing. And I think, Housel's point is that the biggest risk isn't necessarily market volatility.
Right, it's not about the market going up and down.
It's not about, losing a little bit of money here and there. The biggest risk is ruin.
Ruin, yeah, like losing it all.
Losing it all, those catastrophic events that can wipe out your savings.
And he uses that example of Jesse Livermore, right?
Yeah, the legendary trader.
Lost fortunes, multiple times over.
Yeah, he was incredibly skilled at making money. But he was equally skilled at losing it.
Yeah, and ultimately, it ended tragically for him.
It did.
So it's a real cautionary tale.
It is.
And it highlights the importance of, not just being smart,
Right.
but also being careful.
Yeah, being aware of the risks, managing the risks.
And understanding that, we don't have complete control.
Right. There's always going to be some element of luck involved.
Yeah, yeah. So it's about, having a plan, but also being prepared for the plan to go off the rails.
Exactly. Having that room for error.
Room for error, yeah. And I guess this kind of ties into those appealing fictions that we were talking about before.
Right, because, those appealing fictions can really lead us to take on more risk than we should.
Yeah, because we convince ourselves that, oh, this time it's different.
Right. This time the market will always go up.
I found the secret formula.
I can't lose. And that's when we get into trouble.
So it's really about, being honest with ourselves.
Yeah, about our own biases.
About our limitations.
Our limitations.
And about the fact that, we're not always going to be right.
Exactly.
And so, we talked earlier about, defining the game we're playing.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
And I think that's, a really powerful concept.
You do.
Because, it's easy to get caught up in, trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Right. Trying to meet other people's expectations.
Yeah, or following, some guru's advice without really thinking about, okay, well, does this actually make sense for me?
Right. Does this align with my goals, my values?
Yeah. My risk tolerance.
Exactly.
So how do we define our own game?
Well, I think it starts with those tough questions, right?
Yeah.
What is it that I really want? What's important to me?
What kind of life do I want to live?
What does success look like to me?
Yeah, yeah, and it's amazing, once you start asking those questions, it's like it can really change your perspective on things.
It can. You might realize that, maybe that big house or that fancy car isn't actually that important to you.
Right. Maybe it's more about, having more time with your family.
Traveling the world.
Pursuing your passions.
Yeah, whatever it is that really lights you up.
And it's about recognizing that money is a tool.
A tool to help you achieve those things.
Yeah, but it's not the end goal in itself.
Right. And I think, as we kind of wrap up this this deep dive into the psychology of money.
Yeah.
I think, if there's one thing that I hope people take away from this, it's that financial success isn't about being a genius.
It's not about having some secret formula.
It's not about outsmarting the market.
It's about understanding yourself.
Exactly.
Your motivations, your biases, your fears.
And aligning your behavior with your goals. Yep. And so, as you continue on your own journey with money.
Yeah.
Keep these insights in mind.
Keep diving deep.
Keep diving deep.
We'll see you next time.